Okay, solving log equations or solving equations, we need to undo. Okay, so there's two ways to get rid of logs. We can either have log equals log and we can drop the logs. That's not the case here. So the other way is to use the definition of log. So converting a log into an exponent. So that's base 4 exponent -2 equals my argument. When I solve this ends up being 1/16 is equal to x minus 3. When I solve for x, I get 3 and 1/16, so that works out to be 49/16. Okay, so we just got to be careful because when we do this, we have to make sure that we can substitute back in. So if I substitute back that back into my x, I don't get a negative log. I get log is equal to log of 1/16. That works, so that is correct. But we have to check for extraneous solutions when we have log equations. So here we need to undo the log. So I'm going to undo the log with an exponent. Okay, that equals my argument. Okay, so I'm solving for x here. So if I want to undo everything to find out x, the next step is to undo is a -3. So I'm going to end up with adding 3 to both sides. I'm going to change that to 1/a. Okay, so basically I'm doing the inverse to get rid of all these parts. So if I want to solve this, I need to get rid of the sign. Well, I know how to get rid of sign. I know that it's an inverse again. So I'm going to inverse the sign. Okay, so then I'm going to inverse the sign. The sign is equal to this, so the inverse of this equals to the argument inside, which is x squared. And then the last step is I'm going to solve for x. So I'm going to end up with using a square root. The plus minus square root is inverse of square. Okay, the square root by itself is not the perfect inverse because remember the parabola is like this, the square root's like this. To get an inverse, I need the other half. Okay, so this is the reflection property of inverses. So then inside the square root is going to be the arc sign of whatever that number works out to be. Okay? Okay, so same thing here. We need to start inversing these things. So the inverse sign equals pi/2. Well, that means that the inside function, so this is, the inverse gives me angle, so the inside must be the ratio. So what ratio gives me pi/2? Well, if I look at my angle pi/2, the sine ratio that gives me pi/2 is 1. So I know that this argument, cosine of x minus pi, must be equal to 1. Okay, so it's the value 1 right there. Okay, it's this line y equals 1, or so sine equals 1. So if you're not sure, you really could write it like this as well. I can write it in sine form. Some people like to write it in sine form. Sine pi/2 is equal to cosine of x minus pi. Oh yeah, that's equal to 1. So I get this equation. Okay, so that's perfectly fine as well. We can write it in its inverse, okay, or in the inverse form, and then actually do the calculation like this. Or you can actually solve it. It's up to you. So here now I have cosine theta equals 1. So I need a different picture for this. So cosine theta equals 1. I'm going to do this in red. So cosine theta equals 1. That means the ratio is equal to 1. Okay, and cosine is equal to 1. So it's this picture here. Now this time instead of finding the ratio, I'm finding the angle. This angle is equal to 0. So that means that the angle x minus pi must be equal to 0. Okay, because that horizontal line is angle 0. And then solving for solving for x, my answer is going to be x equals pi. And I did solve this by undoing pieces or using inverse functions. So same thing here. I want to use inverse to solve this. I'm going to use the definition of log and convert it to the inverse exponent. Okay, that's base pi exponent 1, and that's going to equal arc cos of whatever that ratio is. Okay, well, if you're not comfortable with seeing it that way, we can either draw the picture. Okay, here's pi. The angle is pi. The ratio is -1. Okay, we're talking about the cosine ratio. Or we could write it in the cosine form. Cosine of pi, cosine of the angle, is equal to the ratio x minus 1/2. In either case, I get -1 equals x minus 1/2. Add 1/2 to both sides. I get x equals -1/2. Okay, so I'm just going to plug it in to make sure it works. -1/2 minus half is -1. The arc cos of -1 is pi. Log pi of pi is equal to 1. Yeah, that works.